He came to judge her heart, but his lie ruined the love he wanted. 1967. The summer heat in Meridian, Mississippi clung to everything like a second skin. Claire Hastings pushed open the screen door of her father's general store, letting it slam behind her with the familiar crack that had marked every entrance and exit of her 23 years. Inside, the overhead fans barely stirred the thick air, and the scent of wood polish mixed with the metallic tang of hardware bins lining the back wall. Her father stood behind the register, sorting through receipts with the careful precision that had kept Hastings & Son General Store running for 42 years, though there'd never been a son, only Claire, and that fact hung unspoken between them like the dust motes suspended in the afternoon light. Before we continue with Claire's story, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Your support means everything, and we'd love to hear from you. Now, let's get back to that sweltering Mississippi afternoon. "Daddy, I'm heading to the library," Claire said, untying her work apron. "Mrs. Patterson needs help cataloging the new shipments before the town council meeting tonight." William Hastings looked up, his weathered face creasing with the expression she'd learned to read as disapproval wrapped in concern. "You spending an awful lot of time at that library, Claire Bear? People are starting to talk? Let them talk." She folded the apron with sharp, deliberate movements. "I'm helping our community. Nothing wrong with that. It's not the helping that concerns me. It's who you're helping with." He set down his pencil, giving her his full attention now. "That petition Mrs. Patterson's been circulating, the one about integrating the library, it's stirring up trouble. Your mother's bridge club won't stop gossiping about it." Claire felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the constant pressure of living in a town where everyone knew everyone's business and expected you to color neatly within the lines they'd drawn generations ago. "The Supreme Court ruled on Brown vs. Board 13 years ago, Daddy. The world is changing whether Meridian wants it to or not. That may be, but you don't have to be the one pushing it along." His voice softened. "I worry about you, honey. You're too much like your grandmother, all fire and conviction. She never knew when to keep her head down either." Claire kissed his cheek, tasting the salt of his honest sweat. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The library occupied a converted Victorian house on Oak Street, its white pillars slightly yellowed with age, but still dignified. Claire found Mrs. Patterson in the back room, surrounded by cardboard boxes stamped with the Mississippi State Library Commission's seal. The older woman's gray hair had escaped its neat bun, and her reading glasses hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "Oh, thank goodness," Mrs. Patterson said when she saw Claire. "I've been drowning in Dewey Decimal all afternoon, and we have a visitor." That's when Claire noticed him, a man in his late 20s standing near the window, examining the spines of books on the reference shelf with an intensity that seemed almost theatrical. He wore khaki slacks and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing tanned forearms. His dark hair needed a trim, falling across his forehead in a way that suggested either carelessness or careful cultivation. When he turned, Claire caught the flash of a camera hanging from his neck. "Claire Hastings, meet Daniel Morrison," Mrs. Patterson said. "He's a graduate student from the University of Chicago, doing research on Southern literature and community libraries. I told him he picked quite a summer to visit Mississippi." Daniel extended his hand, and when Claire shook it, she noticed the ink stains on his fingers, the mark of someone who wrote by hand, who lived inside words. "A pleasure, Miss Hastings. Mrs. Patterson tells me you're the backbone of this library's volunteer program." "She's being generous." Claire withdrew her hand, conscious of his direct gaze. His eyes were grey, the color of storm clouds over the Gulf. "I just help where I can." "Claire's being modest," Mrs. Patterson interjected. She organized our entire children's reading program last summer and taught herself proper archival techniques to help preserve our oldest collections. If she'd been born a man, she'd be running some university library by now. Claire felt heat rise to her cheeks, not entirely from embarrassment. She'd grown accustomed to that particular lament, the way people praised her competence while simultaneously mourning the supposed tragedy of her gender. Daniel, however, looked genuinely interested rather than patronizing. "What brought you to Mississippi, Mr. Morrison?" Claire asked, eager to shift attention away from herself. "Chicago's a long way from Meridian. Please, call me Daniel." He gestured to the boxes surrounding them. "I'm studying how rural libraries serve as cultural preservation centers in the South, particularly during periods of social transition. The work you're doing here, integrating collections and expanding access, it's exactly the kind of grassroots change that historians will look back on as pivotal." Mrs. Patterson beamed. "See, Claire, I told you our work mattered." What Claire didn't notice was the way Daniel's jaw tightened when he said historian, or how his gaze lingered on the petition clipboard resting on Mrs. Patterson's desk, the one with 43 signatures demanding that Meridian Public Library open its doors to all citizens regardless of race, as federal law required but local custom stubbornly resisted. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel became a fixture at the library. He photographed the card catalogues, interviewed Mrs. Patterson about the library's history, and took copious notes in a leather journal that never left his side. He asked questions that seemed innocuous about the town's power structure, about opposition to integration, about the names on that petition, and Claire found herself drawn into longer and longer conversations. They talked while sorting books, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same volume. They talked on the library's back steps during breaks, sharing lukewarm lemonade from Mrs. Patterson's thermos while cicadas screamed in the oak trees. They talked about Faulkner and Welty, about the difference between the South people imagined and the South they lived in, about whether change came from inside communities or had to be forced from outside. "You're different from most of the men in this town," Claire said one evening as they locked up the library. The sun hung low over the horizon, painting everything amber and gold. "You actually listen when women talk. You don't just wait for your turn to speak." Daniel smiled, but something flickered behind his eyes, guilt maybe, or calculation. "My mother raised me to respect intelligence wherever I found it. Gender seemed like a pretty arbitrary limiting factor." "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. The past tense landed between them. "Cancer 3 years ago. She never got to see me finish my doctorate work." Claire touched his arm instinctively, feeling the warmth of his skin through the cotton fabric. "I'm so sorry." They stood there on the library steps as evening deepened around them, the streetlights flickering to life one by one down Oak Street. When Daniel leaned in to kiss her, Claire didn't pull away. His lips tasted like library dust and peppermint gum, and for a moment the weight of Meridian's expectations lifted from her shoulders. But in that same moment, in a photo lab 3 states away, prints were being developed that would show Daniel Morrison's real face. Not as a graduate student, but as a journalist for the Chicago Tribune, sent to cover the integration crisis in small-town Mississippi. His editor wanted human interest angles, controversial quotes, photographs that would show northern readers how backward the South remained. And he'd found the perfect story, the white shopkeeper's daughter who dared to challenge her town's racial segregation, who volunteered at a library fighting for integration, who'd signed that petition knowing it would make her a target. Claire Hastings was exactly the kind of naive idealist who made good copy, the kind of subject who'd trust a man with a kind smile and careful questions. Daniel told himself he'd reveal the truth soon. He told himself Claire would understand that journalism served a higher purpose than personal honesty. He told himself that what he felt for her was secondary to the importance of the story he needed to tell. But when he kissed her again that night, under the oak trees that had witnessed a century of Meridian's secrets, he knew he was lying to his editor, to Claire, and most dangerously to himself. The investigation begins. The Meridian Town Council met every third Thursday in the basement of First Baptist Church, a choice of venue that said everything about how power worked in their corner of Mississippi. Claire arrived early, clutching a manila folder containing the library's formal petition, her stomach tight with nervous anticipation. Mrs. Patterson had been called out of town for a family emergency, leaving Claire to present their case alone. The basement smelled of coffee and mildew, its wood-paneled walls decorated with children's Sunday school artwork. The council members, all men, all over 50, all white, sat in folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. Mayor Thornton presided from a slightly elevated position, his considerable bulk overflowing the chair. Claire recognized the others, Mr. Dalton from the bank, Sheriff Pritchard, Reverend Matthews, and her father's oldest friend, George Wexler, who owned the hardware store next to Hastings and Son. Daniel sat in the back row of observers, his camera visible but his notebook hidden in his lap. When Claire's eyes found his, he gave her an encouraging smile that made her heart lift despite her anxiety. "Miss Hastings," Mayor Thornton drawled, checking his pocket watch with exaggerated patience. "I understand you're here on behalf of Mrs. Patterson and her petition." Claire stood, smoothing her cotton dress, pale blue with white buttons, the kind of modest outfit that might make conservative men take her seriously. "Yes, Mr. Mayor. As you know, the library has received a formal request to extend full access to all Meridian citizens, regardless of race. Federal law requires—" "We're aware of what federal law requires," Thornton interrupted. "We're also aware that Meridian has its own ways of doing things, ways that have kept the peace for generations. You're asking us to upset that balance. I'm asking us to follow the law." Claire kept her voice steady, channeling her grandmother's fire without letting it become heat. "The library is funded by all taxpayers, including Negro citizens. They have every right to access its services." Sheriff Pritchard leaned back in his chair, his badge catching the fluorescent light. "Now, Claire, can I call you Claire? You're a smart girl. You know what happened in Birmingham. You saw what happened in Selma. You want that kind of trouble here? Because that's what integration brings. Outside agitators, violence, good people getting hurt." "The only trouble I see," Claire replied, "is the trouble we create by denying our neighbors basic dignity." Reverend Matthews cleared his throat. "Miss Hastings, I appreciate your Christian compassion, but there's a difference between charity and forcing social mixing that makes people uncomfortable. The Negro community has their own churches, their own schools, their own spaces. Why upset that arrangement?" "Because separate isn't equal, Reverend. The Supreme Court said so 13 years ago, and basic morality said so long before that." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. George Wexler, who'd bounced Claire on his knee when she was a toddler, looked at her with something close to pity. "Claire, honey, have you thought about how this affects your family? Your daddy's store depends on goodwill from this community. People talk. They remember who stirred up trouble. My daddy raised me to do what's right, Mr. Wexler, even when it's hard." Daniel's pencil scratched across his notebook, recording every word, every revealing exchange. This was exactly what his editor wanted. The collision between Old South and New, tradition and justice, maintained by men who couched racism in the language of concern and peacekeeping. Claire's courage made her an even better story than he'd hoped. Mayor Thornton rapped his knuckles on the table. "Miss Hastings, we appreciate you bringing this matter to our attention. The council will take your petition under advisement and respond in due course." "Due course could be months," Claire said. "Meanwhile, Our library remains in violation of federal law. That's our decision to make, young lady, not yours." Thornton's voice hardened. "This meeting is adjourned." Outside, the night air felt cool compared to the stifling basement. Claire's hands shook as she fumbled with her car keys, a beat-up Plymouth Valiant that had been her grandmother's. Daniel appeared at her elbow, his presence both comforting and electric. "You were magnificent in there," he said. "The way you stood up to them. I didn't accomplish anything." Claire blinked back tears of frustration. "They're going to bury the petition in committee and hope everyone forgets about it. You accomplished more than you know." Daniel reached for her hand. "You put them on record. You forced them to say out loud what they usually just imply. That matters. Does it? Or am I just making things harder for people who can't afford the consequences of my principles?" She looked up at him, suddenly desperate for reassurance. "Mrs. Patterson could lose her job. My father could lose customers. What if I'm being selfish, Daniel? What if my need to feel righteous is hurting the people I love?" Daniel pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a way that felt simultaneously protective and possessive. "Claire, change always has a cost. But the cost of not changing, of letting injustice continue just because it's comfortable, that's so much higher. You're not being selfish. You're being brave." She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent of aftershave and darkroom chemicals. "Stay with me tonight, please. I don't want to be alone." He should have said no. He should have maintained professional distance, should have remembered that he was there as an observer, not a participant. But Daniel was 28 years old, attracted to a woman who challenged everything he'd expected to find in Mississippi, and he was tired of the weight of his deception. They went to her apartment above the drugstore on Main Street, a cramped space with a kitchenette and windows that overlooked the town square. The building's owner, Mrs. Chen, was one of the few Chinese families in Meridian, and she'd rented to Claire without asking questions or imposing curfews, treating her like an adult rather than a wayward daughter. Claire made coffee while Daniel examined her bookshelf, mostly paperbacks, Steinbeck and Baldwin, alongside mystery novels and Southern Gothic literature. A framed photograph showed a stern-looking woman in suffragette-era clothing, her expression both fierce and familiar. "My grandmother," Claire said, handing him a chipped mug. "Constance Hastings. She was one of the first women in Meridian to register to vote after the 19th Amendment passed. My father says I have her stubborn streak. I'd call it conviction, not stubbornness." They sat on her lumpy sofa, thighs touching, the coffee growing cold as they talked about everything except the lie that lay between them like a landmine waiting to be stepped on. Daniel told her about growing up in Chicago, about his mother's fight with cancer, about his dreams of writing something that mattered. All true things, but arranged to create a false picture, like a photograph cropped to exclude crucial context. When he kissed her, Claire tasted the coffee on his tongue and felt something crack open inside her chest, not breaking, but opening, like dawn splitting night. She'd been kissed before, fumbling encounters in high school, and a brief relationship with a college boy who'd expected her to abandon her ambitions for his. But this felt different. Daniel saw her mind as well as her body, valued her thoughts as much as her presence. They moved to the bedroom, Claire's hands trembling as she unbuttoned his shirt, Daniel's breath hitching as she traced the muscles of his chest. The intimacy unfolded slowly, tentatively, both of them learning the geography of the other's body, the sounds each made, the rhythms that matched and syncopated. When it was over, they lay tangled in sheets that smelled of lavender detergent, Claire's head on Daniel's shoulder, his fingers tracing absent patterns on her arm. "I've never felt this way before," she whispered into the darkness, "like I could trust someone completely." Daniel's hand stilled on her skin. Guilt crashed over him like a physical weight, stealing his breath. He should tell her now. He should explain about the assignment, about his real purpose in Meridian, about the article that was already taking shape in his mind. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped by cowardice and desire. "Claire, Shh." She pressed her finger to his lips. "Don't ruin it with words. Just stay." So he stayed, holding her as she fell asleep, listening to her breathing even out while his conscience screamed. In his camera bag across the room, undeveloped film captured images of the town council meeting, of Claire's face as she argued for justice, of the petition with its 43 signatures, all the evidence his editor would need for a story that would make Daniel's reputation and destroy everything he was beginning to want more than professional success. The unraveling truth. The Meridian Gazette arrived on doorsteps every Tuesday morning, its pages thin and ink-smudged, reporting on town council meetings, high school football scores, and agricultural commodity prices. But the Tuesday after Daniel Morrison had been in town for 3 weeks, the Gazette published something unusual, a photograph on the front page showing Claire Hastings standing at a podium, her face set with determination, below a headline that read, "Local woman challenges library segregation at council meeting." Claire was restocking shelves at her father's store when Mrs. Talbot rushed in, the newspaper clutched in her manicured hands like evidence of a crime. "Claire Hastings, have you seen this? Everyone's talking about it." Her father emerged from the stockroom, took one look at the paper, and went pale. "Claire, we need to talk. In the back. Now." The stockroom smelled of cardboard and metal, nails, screws, coils of wire arranged on industrial shelving. William Hastings closed the door and turned to his daughter with an expression she'd rarely seen. Not just disappointment, but fear. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked quietly. "Making a public stand is one thing. Having your name and face plastered on the front page is another." "I didn't ask to be photographed, Daddy. I was just stating my position." "Your position." He laughed bitterly. "Claire, 3 customers have already called this morning to cancel their accounts. Tom Henderson said, if I can't control my own daughter, he'll take his business to Jackson. The Elks Lodge voted to ask me to step down from the membership committee." The news hit Claire like cold water. She'd known there would be backlash, but she hadn't fully reckoned with how her actions would ricochet through her father's life. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Of course you didn't mean. You never think about consequences, just like your grandmother." He rubbed his face tiredly. "That Morrison fellow, the one you've been spending so much time with, he took those photographs. Did you know that?" "What? No." "Daniel's a graduate student. He's doing research." "Claire." Her father's voice turned gentle, which somehow felt worse than anger. "Walter Preston at the Gazette told me that Morrison contacted him after the council meeting, offered to sell him photographs and a written account of the proceedings. Walter bought them because it's news, but he wanted me to know the source. That young man isn't who you think he is." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Claire's feet. "That's not possible. Daniel wouldn't what? Use you? Deceive you?" William reached for his daughter's hand. "Honey, men from up north come down here all the time looking for stories that make us look backward. They find well-meaning young people like you, get them to trust them, then twist everything into propaganda. I've seen it before." Claire pulled away, her mind racing. She thought about Daniel's questions, always so careful and probing, his notebook that never left his side, the way he'd encouraged her to speak up at the council meeting, to be bold, to give him exactly the kind of dramatic scene that would make good copy. "I need to go." "Claire?" But she was already moving, pushing through the store's front door, letting it slam behind her with enough force to rattle the window glass. She drove to the library with her vision blurred by tears, nearly running a stop sign. Mrs. Patterson's car sat in the parking lot, and relief flooded through Claire. She needed advice, needed someone to tell her she was overreacting, that her father was wrong. Inside, Mrs. Patterson stood at the circulation desk with her own copy of the Gazette spread before her. When she looked up at Claire, her expression was complicated, sympathy mixed with something that might have been disappointment. "I was about to call you," Mrs. Patterson said. "We need to talk about Daniel Morrison." Claire sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "You know something. I called the University of Chicago this morning just to verify his research credentials." Mrs. Patterson removed her glasses, polishing them with the edge of her cardigan, a nervous habit that told Claire the news would be bad. "There's no graduate student named Daniel Morrison enrolled in their library science or literature programs. But there is a Daniel Morrison who writes for the Chicago Tribune. He's known for his coverage of civil rights issues in the South." The betrayal crashed over Claire in waves. Every conversation, every intimate moment, every promise Daniel had made, all of it contaminated by lies. He hadn't been studying Southern libraries. He'd been studying her, collecting her words and trust like specimens to be pinned behind glass for Northern readers to observe and judge. "Did he ever care about me at all?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Or was I just convenient?" Mrs. Patterson came around the desk and put her arms around Claire, letting her cry into her shoulder, the way she'd probably comforted countless children over the years. "I don't know, honey. Maybe he cares and still chose to use you. People are capable of feeling two contradictory things at once. It doesn't make it right." The library door opened and Daniel walked in carrying his camera bag and wearing an expression that shifted from cheerful to stricken when he saw Claire's tear-stained face. "Claire, what's wrong?" She stood, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, channeling her grandmother's fire into something hard and cutting. "How long were you planning to keep lying to me? Until after the article was published? Or were you going to disappear and let me find out when I saw my words in print twisted into whatever narrative fit your story?" Daniel's face went white. "Who told you? Does it matter?" Claire's voice rose, 3 weeks of trust curdling into rage. "My father warned me. Mrs. Patterson verified it. You're a journalist, not a graduate student. You came here to write about small-town racism and found yourself a perfect subject, the naive white girl fighting her own community. What a compelling human interest angle. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Daniel? Or should I call you Mr. Morrison? Is Daniel even your real name?" "Yes, Daniel is real, and yes, I'm a journalist. But everything else, what I feel for you, what we shared, that was real too." He took a step toward her, but Mrs. Patterson positioned herself protectively between them. "Young man, I think you've done enough damage," Mrs. Patterson said coldly. "Claire asked you a direct question. How long were you planning to keep lying?" Daniel looked at Claire, and she saw genuine anguish in those storm-grey eyes. But anguish didn't erase deception. "I was trying to find the right time to tell you. I knew it would be complicated. But the assignment, my editor sent me to cover integration resistance in Mississippi, to show readers up north what's happening down here. When I met you, when I saw the work you were doing, I thought this was exactly the story that needed to be told. So you used me. You let me believe you were someone you're not. Let me trust you. Let me—" Claire's voice broke. She couldn't say the rest, couldn't admit out loud how completely she'd given herself to him. "You had no right." "I had every right to do my job." Daniel's frustration broke through his guilt. "This is news, Claire. What's happening in Meridian is part of a larger story about civil rights and Southern resistance. Your courage deserves to be recognized, to be packaged and sold to people who want to feel superior to backward Southerners." Claire laughed bitterly. "Did you get good quotes, Daniel? Did I perform my role well? The idealistic shopkeeper's daughter, standing up to the racist establishment. I'm sure your readers will eat it up while they congratulate themselves for not being like us." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Claire felt something inside her crystallize into diamond-hard resolve. You lied to me. You manipulated me into trusting you. You photographed a private meeting without permission and sold those images to our local newspaper, knowing it would cause trouble for everyone involved. And you want to talk about fair? Daniel reached for her again, and this time Claire stepped back before Mrs. Patterson could intervene. Don't touch me! Don't come near me! And don't you dare publish a word of what I told you. Those were private conversations, shared in confidence. I'm sorry. Daniel's voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Claire. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me. And what's worse, you knew you would, and you did it anyway. That's not journalism, Daniel. That's cruelty dressed up as purpose. She walked out of the library with her head high, refusing to let him see her crumble. But once she reached her car, parked behind the building where no one could see, Claire pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and sobbed for her ruined trust, for her father's damaged business, for the community backlash she'd invited by believing in a man who saw her as material rather than human. And somewhere in a room at the Meridian Motor Lodge, Daniel Morrison sat on his bed, surrounded by notes and photographs, staring at the story he'd come to write and wondering why victory felt so much like devastation. The fallout. The article appeared in the Chicago Tribune 10 days later, spread across 2 pages, with photographs that turned Meridian, Mississippi, into a case study in Southern dysfunction. Daniel had tried to be fair. He'd included quotes from council members, context about federal law versus local custom, acknowledgement of the economic fears that drove resistance to change. But the central narrative was Claire, the brave young woman fighting her own town's bigotry, isolated by her principles, pressured by her family to stay silent. He'd changed her name to Karen H. and omitted identifying details, but in a town of 4,000 people, anonymity was impossible. By noon on the day the article appeared, photocopies circulated through Meridian like wanted posters. By evening, someone had spray-painted "Race Traitor" on the plate glass window of Hastings & Son General Store. William Hastings stood on the sidewalk with a bucket of soapy water and a sponge, methodically scrubbing away the paint while neighbors walked past without offering to help. Claire appeared beside him with her own sponge, and together they worked in silence, father and daughter united by shared humiliation. "You don't have to do this," William said finally. "I can manage. I caused it. I'll fix it." "You can't fix this, Claire Bear." He rinsed his sponge in the bucket, watching pink water swirl. "Tom Henderson came by this morning, said the Elks Lodge voted to ask me to resign completely. 3 more customers closed their accounts. The bank called about our loan extension." Claire's throat tightened. Her father had been making payments on that loan for 15 years, expanding the store, modernizing inventory. If the bank called it in early, they'd lose everything. "I'll leave," she said quietly. "I'll go to Jackson, find work there. Once I'm gone, things will settle down." "You think running away fixes anything?" William's voice carried an edge she'd rarely heard. "You started this fight, Claire. You don't get to abandon it when it becomes inconvenient." "I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe you were, maybe you weren't, but you chose to trust a stranger over your own community, and now we're all paying the price." He set down his sponge and looked at her directly. "That Morrison fellow, he left town yesterday, checked out of the motor lodge without a word to anyone, got what he wanted and disappeared. And the news shouldn't have hurt. Claire had told Daniel never to contact her again, but it did. Some foolish part of her had imagined he might stay, might fight for her, might choose love over career advancement. Instead, he'd proven exactly what her father had warned. Northern journalists came south for stories, not truth. At the library, Mrs. Patterson faced her own consequences. The town council held an emergency meeting and voted to suspend her, with pay pending an investigation into professional conduct. The stated reason was misuse of library resources for political activism. The real reason was retaliation for supporting integration. Claire found her former mentor at home, packing books into cardboard boxes with the efficient movements of someone who'd already accepted defeat. "They can't fire you," Claire protested. "You have tenure, union, protection. They can make my life miserable enough that I quit voluntarily." Mrs. Patterson wrapped a first edition Faulkner in newspaper. "I'm 62 years old, Claire. I'm tired. I don't have the energy for a legal fight that might take years." So they win. They've been winning for a very long time. One petition and one newspaper article won't change that. She paused, looking at Claire with sad wisdom. "I'm not angry at you, if that's what you're worried about. You spoke your conscience. That journalist exploited your honesty, but the honesty itself was admirable. I feel like I ruined everything." "You didn't ruin anything that wasn't already broken, honey. You just exposed the cracks." Mrs. Patterson returned to her packing. "But I'll give you some advice. Next time you want to change the world, make sure you're prepared for the world to push back. Idealism without strategy is just martyrdom." Claire left feeling hollowed out, scraped clean of the naive confidence that had carried her through the past month. She drove to the colored section of town, crossing the invisible boundary marked by railroad tracks and unpaved roads, until she reached the small brick building that served as Meridian's Negro Library, technically separate, legally mandated, actually underfunded and understocked, compared to the white library she'd fought to integrate. Miss Ada Washington sat at the circulation desk, a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that had watched generations of Meridian's black children grow up with limited access to books and opportunity. When Claire walked in, Miss Ada's expression remained neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. "I wanted to apologize," Claire said, standing awkwardly in the small room lined with mismatched shelves. "I tried to help, and I made things worse. The petition is dead. Mrs. Patterson lost her job. Your community's no closer to accessing the main library than before." Miss Ada removed her reading glasses slowly, a gesture that commanded attention. "Let me ask you something, Miss Hastings. Did you ever consult with us before starting that petition? Did you ask what we needed, what we wanted, how we preferred to fight this battle?" Claire felt her cheeks burn. I assumed. You assumed you knew what was best for us. You assumed we needed a white savior to speak for us, because surely we couldn't speak for ourselves." Miss Ada's voice remained gentle, but the rebuke landed hard. "We've been fighting for access to that library since it opened in 1923. We've filed formal complaints, organized boycotts, negotiated with council members who occasionally show up to Negro churches looking for votes. We know how to fight this fight, Miss Hastings. We just do it carefully, strategically, so our people don't lose jobs or get hurt. I'm sorry. I should have listened first." "Yes, you should have." Miss Ada stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a folder thick with documents. "This is 40 years of our work. Letters to the State Library Commission, petitions signed by hundreds of Negro citizens, meeting minutes from our own community discussions about integration strategy. You want to help? Start by respecting that we're not helpless. We're not waiting to be saved. And we're not interested in becoming props for journalists looking to write about Southern dysfunction." Claire took the folder with shaking hands, feeling the weight of her presumption. "What can I do now? Go home, repair your relationship with your father. Figure out who you are when you're not performing righteousness for an audience." Miss Ada's expression softened slightly. "You're young. You'll make more mistakes. The question is whether you'll learn from them." That night, Claire sat in her apartment with Miss Ada's folder spread across her table, reading through decades of organized resistance and strategic activism that had been invisible to her despite happening in her own town. She read letters from parents requesting library cards for their children, formal complaints about the separate but equal facilities that were anything but equal, carefully worded appeals to white council members who held all the power, and she realized with crushing clarity that her dramatic stand at the town council meeting had accomplished nothing except making herself feel brave. She'd centered her own moral awakening rather than listening to the people who'd been fighting for justice long before she discovered her conscience. A knock at her door interrupted her reading. For one wild moment, Claire's heart leaped. Maybe Daniel had come back, maybe he could explain, but it was George Wexler standing in the hallway, hat in his hands, looking older than his 63 years. "Claire, honey, your daddy asked me to talk to you. He's too proud to say this himself, but we need to figure something out about the store. The bank is serious about calling in that loan." Claire invited him in, made coffee, listened as George laid out the financial reality in numbers that didn't lie. The store was hemorrhaging customers. 3 more had closed accounts that afternoon. Without immediate intervention, William Hastings would lose the business his own father had started in 1925. "How much do you need?" Claire asked, already calculating the money she had saved from her library volunteer stipend and part-time bookkeeping work. "More than you have, sweetheart." George set down his coffee untouched. "But there might be another way. Tom Henderson mentioned that if you were to leave town, not running away, just stepping back for a while, some folks might be willing to give your daddy another chance. They'd see it as you learning your lesson. You want me to go into exile so my father can save his store? I want you to make a choice with open eyes. You can stay and fight, prove you won't be intimidated, but that fight will cost your family everything. Or you can step back, let tempers cool, and maybe accomplish your goals through less public channels later." Claire thought about Miss Ada's words. "We just do it carefully, strategically, so our people don't lose jobs or get hurt." She thought about Daniel's article, which had made her feel momentarily important while accomplishing nothing except punishment for everyone around her. She thought about her grandmother, whose righteous fire had indeed changed things, but who'd also died alone and bitter because conviction without wisdom was just another form of selfishness. "I'll leave," she said quietly, "but not forever, just long enough for people to forget they're angry." George nodded, relief evident on his weathered face. "That's real grown-up of you, Claire. Your daddy will appreciate it, even if he doesn't say so." After George left, Claire sat in the darkness of her apartment, listening to Meridian settle into its familiar nighttime rhythms. Distant train whistles, crickets singing in the parks, the hum of window air conditioners fighting the August heat. She'd come so close to breaking through, to forcing change, to mattering. Instead, she'd learned that mattering was more complicated than standing up and speaking truth. Sometimes it required stepping back, listening more than talking, building coalitions instead of making dramatic gestures. And sometimes it meant leaving the place you loved because your presence had become toxic, even when you'd only tried to help. The long distance between truth and love. 6 months passed. Claire found work in Jackson at the State Archives, cataloguing historical documents and learning the patient, unglamorous work of preserving the past. She rented a small apartment near the Capitol building, joined a book club, attended a Methodist church where no one knew her history. The job paid less than she'd hoped, but Jackson was a larger city with more anonymity, more space to be a person rather than a cautionary tale. She wrote to her father once a week, carefully neutral letters about her work, the weather, the kindness of her landlady. He responded with equally careful updates. The store was recovering slowly. Some customers had returned. The bank had extended the loan. George Wexler sent his regards. No one mentioned the Gazette article anymore, though Claire suspected people in Meridian still whispered when they saw William Hastings walking down Main Street, the man whose daughter had caused such trouble. Claire didn't write to Daniel Morrison. She thought about him constantly, in the hollow hours before dawn, when sleep wouldn't come, during her lunch breaks when she'd find herself composing angry speeches in her head, in the evening when loneliness felt like a physical weight pressing on her chest. But thinking didn't become writing, and writing didn't become sending. Some betrayals ran too deep for apology to bridge. Then, in February 1968, a package arrived at her Jackson apartment with a Chicago postmark. Claire recognized Daniel's handwriting on the address label and almost threw it away unopened. Instead, she set it on her kitchen table and stared at it for 3 days, circling it like something that might explode. When she finally opened it, she found a manuscript, not the Tribune article she'd already read and reread, until she could recite every wounding phrase, but something new. A longer piece, maybe 15,000 words, titled "What I Got Wrong in Meridian, Mississippi." A note paper clipped to the first page read, "Claire, this is what I should have written. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I've been learning. D." Against her better judgment, Claire began to read. The new article dissected Daniel's own failures with brutal honesty. He described how he'd entered Meridian with preconceptions about Southern racism, looking for villains to expose rather than complexity to understand. He described manipulating Claire's trust, rationalizing his deception as serving a higher journalistic purpose while ignoring the human cost. He described the easy superiority of Northern liberals who condemned Southern segregation while ignoring their own city's de facto segregation, their own participation in systems of inequality. He described falling in love with Claire Hastings and being too cowardly to choose that love over his career. The piece included interviews Daniel had conducted after leaving Meridian with Miss Ada Washington, who'd explained decades of strategic activism that his original article had ignored, with George Wexler, who'd described the economic pressures that made seemingly racist choices feel like survival to working-class white Southerners, with William Hastings, who'd shared his own evolving views on integration and the complicated love he felt for a daughter whose convictions both frightened and impressed him. Daniel had also tracked down Mrs. Patterson, now retired and living with her sister in Mobile. She told him about her own experiences in the 1950s, quietly integrating professional library conferences and creating informal book exchanges between white and Negro libraries that circumvented official segregation policies. She'd done more to advance racial justice in Mississippi than Claire's dramatic petition ever could, precisely because she'd worked strategically, patiently, and without seeking recognition. The final section of Daniel's manuscript examined his own relationship with truth. He wrote about journalism's claim to objectivity, how that claim often masked the writer's biases and limitations. He wrote about the ethical line between reporting stories and creating them, between observing communities and exploiting them. He wrote about love as an inconvenient variable that disrupted clean narratives, making heroes complicated and villains sympathetic. "I came to Meridian looking for a story," Daniel wrote in his conclusion. "I found something more valuable and more terrifying. Recognition that I was as capable of cruelty and self-deception as the people I'd come to expose." Claire Hastings didn't need a journalist to validate her courage or broadcast her principles. She needed someone to see her as fully human, flawed, learning, trying, and I failed her because I was too invested in my own version of righteousness to do that seeing. Claire set down the manuscript with shaking hands. She didn't know what Daniel wanted from her. Absolution, forgiveness, something else? The piece demonstrated genuine self-awareness, but self-awareness didn't undo damage. He'd still lied. He'd still used her. He'd still prioritized his career over her trust. But he'd also written something brave and honest, something that cost him professional capital to publish. She could imagine his Tribune editors reading this piece, with its admission of journalistic failures and its challenge to Northern liberal self-satisfaction. This wasn't the kind of article that advanced careers. It was the kind that invited criticism, that made colleagues question your judgment. Claire walked to the Capitol building, where a payphone stood near the entrance. She'd memorized the Tribune's phone number months ago, in case of... what? She didn't know. But now she dialed, asked for Daniel Morrison, and felt her heart race as the receptionist transferred her call. "Morrison here?" His voice sounded tired, professionally neutral. "It's Claire." Silence. Then, "Claire, God, I wasn't sure you'd... I read your manuscript. I meant what I said in the note. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I've been thinking about everything that happened, trying to understand what I did wrong and why." "You did a lot wrong, Daniel." Claire leaned against the phone booth glass, watching bureaucrats and politicians hurry past on the sidewalk. "But this piece, it's honest. More honest than most journalism I've read. The Tribune won't publish it. My editor said it's too self-indulgent, too critical of our own coverage practices. So I'm shopping it to other outlets, but the response has been..." He laughed without humor. "Let's just say admitting mistakes isn't popular in our profession." "Will you keep trying?" "Yes, because it's the right thing to do, even if it's professionally stupid. I learned that from someone I hurt badly." Claire closed her eyes, feeling the old anger battle with something more complicated. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of shared humanity. They'd both made mistakes in Meridian. She'd been naive and self-centered, performing righteousness without thinking about consequences. He'd been manipulative and careerist, prioritizing story over people. Both of them had caused harm while believing they were doing good. "I miss you," Daniel said quietly. "I know I don't have the right to say that, but it's true. I miss you too. I hate that I do, but I can't seem to stop. Would you be willing to talk? Not about us necessarily, just talk. I'm driving down to Memphis next week for a civil rights assignment. I could stop in Jackson on the way." Every instinct Claire had screamed to say no, to protect herself from further hurt, but Miss Ada's words echoed in her mind. "The question is whether you'll learn from your mistakes." Maybe learning required giving people second chances when they genuinely tried to change. Maybe wisdom meant distinguishing between people who'd harmed you maliciously and people who'd harmed you through their own brokenness. "There's a diner on Capitol Street called Ruthie's. Good coffee, quiet booths. I could meet you there." "Thursday afternoon? Around 2? "Thursday at 2. Claire paused. "Daniel, don't come expecting anything. I need you to understand that. We're just talking." "I understand. And Claire, thank you for even considering it." After she hung up, Claire stood in the phone booth for a long time, watching winter lights slant across Jackson's government buildings. She thought about the complicated landscape between hatred and love, between justice and mercy, between the person she'd been in Meridian and the person she was becoming in Jackson. She thought about her grandmother, whose righteous fire had burned bright, but eventually consumed everything around it. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, whose strategic patience had accomplished more than dramatic gestures. She thought about Miss Ada Washington, who'd fought for justice while maintaining relationships in a deeply segregated community, who'd learned to work with imperfect allies rather than demanding ideological purity. And she thought about Daniel Morrison, who'd betrayed her trust but was trying, really trying, to become someone better than the man who'd arrived in Meridian looking for a story to boost his career. Thursday came cold and clear, winter sunshine providing light but no warmth. Claire arrived at Ruthie's diner 15 minutes early, ordered coffee, and positioned herself in a back booth where she could watch the door. Her stomach churned with anxiety, and something that might have been anticipation, though she refused to examine that feeling too closely. Daniel walked in at precisely 2 o'clock, and Claire's breath caught despite her best intentions. He looked thinner, his face drawn with exhaustion or stress. He wore the same kind of clothes he'd worn in Meridian, khakis and a button-down shirt. But they hung differently on him now, as if he'd shrunk inside them. When their eyes met across the diner, something passed between them that was too complex for words. Recognition, regret, a question that neither of them could answer yet. He slid into the booth across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other, cataloguing changes and similarities, trying to reconcile memory with present reality. "Thank you for meeting me," Daniel said finally. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either, until I was sitting here waiting." Claire wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, needing something to hold. "Your manuscript was impressive. Hard to read, but impressive." It was hard to write. He ordered coffee from the waitress, then turned back to Claire. "I've been seeing a therapist. Did I mention that? I know it's not exactly common, but after Meridian I realized I had some things to work through, about my mother's death, about my relationship with truth, about why I thought career success would fill the emptiness she left behind." "Is it helping?" "Slowly. Dr. Rosenberg says I have a pattern of prioritizing external validation over authentic connection. She says I use journalism as a way to feel important without having to be vulnerable." He smiled without humor. "She's not wrong." They talked for 3 hours, the conversation flowing more easily than Claire had expected. Daniel described his ongoing struggle to get the Meridian manuscript published, his growing disillusionment with mainstream journalism's resistance to self-examination. Claire talked about her work at the archives, the comfort she'd found in preserving history rather than trying to make it, the slow process of forgiving herself for the consequences of her naive activism. "I wrote to Miss Ada Washington," Claire said, "apologized for not listening to her community's concerns before starting that petition." She wrote back, said she appreciated the gesture, but that real allyship meant ongoing work, not one-time apologies. "Smart woman. She invited me to come back to Meridian sometime to meet with their community organizing group, said they could use someone with archival skills to help document their activism history before the older generation passes away." Daniel reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Would you go back?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me is still too ashamed of how I handled everything." Claire looked at his hand, so close to hers, and made a choice. She closed the distance, her fingers brushing his. "Part of me wonders if some bridges are too burned to rebuild." "I don't think you burned bridges, Claire. I think you exposed fault lines that were already there. That's uncomfortable, but it's not the same as destruction." They left the diner as the sun began its descent, painting Jackson's sky in shades of amber and rose. Daniel walked Claire back to her apartment building, and they stood on the sidewalk in that awkward space between goodbye and something more. "Can I see you again?" Daniel asked. "I know I'm asking a lot, but I'd like to try, slowly, carefully, to see if we can build something honest this time." Claire studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. She found only uncertainty and hope, mirrored vulnerabilities that matched her own. "I need time, Daniel. I need to trust that you're really different, that you've actually changed, and this isn't just another performance. I understand, whatever time you need. But yes, you can see me again. We can try." He smiled then, genuinely. And Claire remembered why she'd fallen for him in the first place, not just his looks or intelligence, but the way he could make her feel seen, understood, valued. She just needed to trust that this time the seeing was real. Barur, what grows from ruins. Over the following months, Daniel and Claire rebuilt their relationship with the kind of painstaking care archaeologists used on fragile artifacts. He drove to Jackson every other weekend, and they spent those visits talking, walking through the city's parks, attending lectures at Tougaloo College, where activists spoke about voting rights and economic justice. They didn't rush into physical intimacy, both of them understanding that trust needed to be reconstructed before passion could be trusted. Daniel finally found a publisher for his Meridian manuscript, a small press in New York that specialized in narrative journalism that challenged conventional narratives. The piece appeared in May 1968, just weeks after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination sent shockwaves through the nation. In that context of reckoning and grief, Daniel's honest examination of his own failures and biases found a surprisingly receptive audience. The article reached Meridian, and the response was mixed. Some people appreciated his honesty. Others saw it as too little, too late. William Hastings read it and said nothing to Claire for 3 weeks. When he finally called, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. "That Morrison fellow wrote about our conversation," he said. "About things I told him regarding you, regarding integration, regarding my own confusion about what's right." "I know, Daddy. I read it. He made me sound complicated, human, not a villain, but not a hero either, just a man trying to figure things out." William paused. "I expected to be angry about it, but mostly I'm just tired. Tired of pretending I have all the answers when I don't. None of us have all the answers. Your grandmother thought she did, drove everyone crazy with her certainty." He laughed softly. "Maybe you got her fire, but you're learning something she never did, that being right isn't enough if you burn down everything around you proving it." The conversation opened a door between them that had been closed since Claire left Meridian. They began talking more regularly, honestly, about the store's recovery, about changing attitudes in town, about William's own evolving understanding of race and justice. He admitted he'd started attending meetings of a quiet, interracial dialogue group that met in a church basement, businessmen and clergy from both white and black communities trying to find ways forward that didn't require either dramatic confrontation or continued injustice. "It's slow work," William told her, "but maybe slow is better than explosive. Maybe we need time to actually change hearts, not just laws." In June, Claire received a letter from Mrs. Patterson with unexpected news. The Meridian Town Council had quietly voted to integrate the library system. No fanfare, no publicity, just a brief announcement in the Gazette that library cards would now be available to all residents, regardless of race. The change came not from outside pressure, but from internal negotiations, from the patient work of people like Miss Ada Washington and William Hastings' dialogue group, who'd built relationships and trust over months of difficult conversations. "Your petition didn't accomplish what you wanted," Mrs. Patterson wrote, "but it planted seeds. Sometimes the planter doesn't get to see the harvest, but that doesn't mean the seeds were wasted." Claire showed the letter to Daniel during one of his Jackson visits, and they sat together on her apartment's small balcony, watching summer lightning flash in the distance. "I want to ask you something," Daniel said, "and I need you to know there's no pressure attached. But my lease in Chicago is up in August, and I've been offered a position with the Southern Regional Council in Atlanta. They do research and advocacy on civil rights issues, but from inside Southern communities rather than as outside observers. I'd take a pay cut, but the work feels more honest than what I've been doing. That sounds like a good fit for you. Atlanta's only 3 hours from Jackson." He turned to face her directly. "I know we're still rebuilding. I know I haven't earned the right to ask for promises, but I wanted you to know I'm serious about this, about us, about doing work that matters for the right reasons, about building a life that's not based on lies or half-truths." Claire felt her heart race with equal parts fear and longing. "What are you asking, Daniel?" "I'm asking if you think we have a future. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Because if we do, I want to make choices that move me closer to you, not further away. But if we don't, if the damage I caused is too deep to heal, I need to know that too. She thought about her grandmother, who'd chosen conviction over connection and died isolated. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, who'd worked patiently for decades without seeking recognition. She thought about Miss Ada Washington, who'd learned to build coalitions across difference, to work with imperfect allies toward shared goals. She thought about her father, learning late in life that certainty mattered less than humility, that growth required admitting you'd been wrong. And she thought about herself, the naive, righteous girl she'd been in Meridian, and the more complex woman she was becoming in Jackson, someone who'd learned that love required risk, that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, that trust could be rebuilt if both people were willing to do the hard, unglamorous work. I think we have a future, Claire said carefully, but I need you to understand what that means. I won't be your redemption project, Daniel. I won't be the good deed that makes you feel better about your past mistakes. If we do this, we do it as equals. Two people who've both screwed up, both learned things, both committed to being honest even when it's uncomfortable. I wouldn't want it any other way. And I need you to know that I'm planning to go back to Meridian. Not to live, but to work with Miss Ada's group documenting their activism history. It'll mean spending time in a place that holds painful memories for both of us. I think that's exactly what you should do. Daniel took her hand, his grip warm and steady. And if you want company sometimes, if you think it would help rather than complicate things, I'd be honored to assist. I do know something about archives and documentation, even if I've used those skills badly in the past. They kissed then, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. It felt different from their first kisses in Meridian, less desperate, more grounded, built on honesty rather than illusion, on choice rather than chance. Daniel moved to Atlanta in August and took the position with the Southern Regional Council. Claire continued her work in Jackson, but began making monthly trips to Meridian, where she spent weekends helping Miss Ada's community group digitize photographs, transcribe oral histories, and organize decades of meeting minutes and correspondence that documented Black activism in eastern Mississippi. The work was painstaking and unglamorous, but it felt more meaningful than any dramatic gesture she'd ever made. Her father welcomed her back cautiously, and over time they rebuilt their relationship into something more honest than before. Not father and wayward daughter, but two adults learning to respect each other's choices even when they disagreed. William even attended some of the community dialogue meetings with Claire, sitting beside her as white and black residents discussed school integration, economic development, and the complicated process of dismantling systems built over centuries. On Christmas Eve 1968, Daniel drove to Meridian to meet Claire at her father's house for dinner. William had invited them both, along with George Wexler and his wife, Mrs. Patterson, and her sister, and, in a move that would have been unthinkable 18 months earlier, Miss Ada Washington and her husband James. The dinner table crowded with mismatched chairs, and the conversation flowed awkwardly at first, everyone carefully navigating the social minefield of integration in practice rather than theory. But as the evening progressed, something shifted. Stories were shared about growing up in Meridian, about favorite books and complicated families, about hopes for the town's future. Not agreement on everything, but genuine listening, real curiosity about each other's experiences. After dinner, Daniel found Claire on the back porch, wrapped in a cardigan against December's chill. He put his arm around her, and they stood together looking at the yard where Claire had played as a child, the same yard where her grandmother had once planted a garden that neighbors had vandalized because she'd campaigned for women's suffrage. "Your grandmother would be proud of you," Daniel said. "You have her courage, but you've added something she lacked, wisdom about how to use it. I'm still learning, we both are. That's the point, though, isn't it? Growth, not perfection." He turned to face her, his expression serious. Claire, I love you. I've loved you since Meridian, even when I was too broken to love you well. I'm better now. Not perfect, but better. And I want to spend my life continuing to get better alongside you. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Claire's breath caught. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Daniel continued. I know we're still rebuilding, but I wanted you to know my intentions, to have something concrete to consider. When you're ready, if you're ready, I want to marry you. I want to build a life based on honesty and shared purpose. I want to have arguments and reconciliations, successes and failures, all of it real and earned. Claire took the box with trembling hands. Inside, a simple gold band with a small sapphire. Not a diamond, but something the color of Mississippi sky at twilight. It's beautiful. The jeweler in Atlanta said sapphire represents wisdom and truth, seemed appropriate for us. She closed the box carefully and set it aside, then cupped Daniel's face in her hands. Ask me again in the spring. When the dogwoods bloom and everything's coming back to life, if we're still good then, if we've made it through a full year of honest building, ask me then and I'll say yes. Spring, Daniel agreed, smiling. I can wait until spring. They kissed under the porch light while inside, through the kitchen window, their complicated family of choice laughed and argued and cleaned up dinner dishes together, practicing the messy, difficult, essential work of building community across lines that had once seemed impassable. When spring came to Mississippi in 1969, the dogwoods bloomed white and pink against new green leaves. Daniel proposed again on the steps of the Meridian Library, which now welcomed all citizens. Claire said yes. They married in June, in a small ceremony that violated a dozen social conventions. A mixed gathering of family and friends from both races, officiated by Reverend Matthews, who'd evolved considerably since that town council meeting 2 years earlier. William Hastings walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Miss Ada Washington signed as a witness. Mrs. Patterson caught the bouquet, laughing like a girl. And somewhere, Claire liked to imagine, her grandmother's fierce spirit smiled with approval, not at perfection, but at progress, not at certainty, but at courage, tempered with wisdom. The newlyweds moved to Atlanta, where they both worked on civil rights documentation and advocacy. They returned to Meridian regularly, maintaining relationships and commitments they'd learned couldn't be sustained from a distance. They had arguments and make-ups, successes and failures, moments of doubt and moments of absolute certainty that they'd chosen right. Their love wasn't the fairy tale romance of first meetings and instant connection. It was something harder won and more durable. A relationship built on broken trust rebuilt, mistakes acknowledged and learned from, and the daily choice to be honest even when dishonesty would be easier. It was love earned through fire and failure, forged in the complicated landscape between idealism and pragmatism, between northern judgment and southern defensiveness, between two people who'd hurt each other badly and then done the difficult work of becoming people worthy of second chances. And in the end, that made it real, not perfect, but real. And real, they learned together, was always better than any story they could have invented.